What if I told you that many of the things that are often talked about as essential for creating a secure attachment with your baby, for example, baby wearing, co-sleeping, and breastfeeding, aren't essential at all? But the fear around needing to do certain things like these or risk your child never forming a secure attachment as a result often leads to so much stress and anxiety for new parents. So let's first dive into why these things aren't important when it comes to forming a secure attachment and what actually matters. It's probably not what you think. Then we'll look at 3 other things that you might worry about as a new parent and why you really don't need to stress about those either. All right, let's go back to the secure attachment. Earlier I mentioned the examples of co-sleeping, baby wearing, and breastfeeding as often being referenced as important for developing this bond. Now, while these choices work beautifully for some families, they're not necessary for the development of a secure attachment. What actually creates that precious bond is incredibly simple. Let's use breastfeeding versus bottle feeding as an example. It doesn't matter how you feed your baby. What matters is that you recognize their need for food and you meet that need by feeding them. And on top of that, you do this reliably and consistently. The act of recognizing your baby's needs and responding to it is what matters, not the method you use to feed them. The key to building that secure attachment is being attentive and consistently and reliably responding to your baby's physical and emotional needs. So if we were to apply this to the example of co-sleeping, once again, you don't need to sleep in the same bed to form a secure attachment. You can still be attentive and consistently meet their physical and emotional needs with your baby in the crib in your bedroom with you. Now, of course, I understand that there's lots of reasons for deciding to co-sleep. All I'm saying here is if you feel like you'd rather not co-sleep, but you feel pressure to because you're worried that not doing so will have a negative impact on their attachment, please don't. Whether you choose to have them sleep in a crib next to you or you choose to co-sleep, either way will have no impact on their attachment to you. In other words, you are what makes the difference. The regular, consistent acts of being there for them every day, not the particular parenting methods you choose or specific must-dos like the earlier examples I mentioned. So if you're stressing because you're not following a specific parenting technique and you're worried that you aren't building a secure attachment as a result, please know that you can relax. Okay, so after hearing all of this, you might feel like you need to jump up and respond to every little sound your baby makes right away. But that's not the case at all. In case you've been trying, let me tell you now that it is impossible to be the perfect parent. Sometimes you'll misread your baby's signals thinking they're tired when they're actually just bored, or you'll take a little bit longer to respond because you're having a quick shower or you're just exhausted. And that's okay. Research by pediatrician Dr. Donald Winnicott found that parents who meet their baby's needs about 30% of the time raise healthy, securely attached children. Now, this concept, known as good enough parenting, reminds us that it's perfectly okay to not get it right every single time. In fact, research by Winnicott and a separate study by Tronick and Giannino indicates that when you occasionally miss cues or take an extra minute to respond, they're learning that they can count on you overall, even if you don't jump in immediately, and they discover that small struggles are okay and that they can handle them. And this helps to build their independence and resilience over time. So the next time you're feeling guilty because you took an extra minute to respond because you were brushing your teeth, or you were trying to get the shampoo out of your hair after they woke early from a nap, or you thought that they were hungry when they were actually tired, remember you're not failing. You're being a good enough parent. You're showing up, trying your best, making mistakes, and trying again. And that's exactly what your baby needs to grow into a secure, confident little person. Now, in those moments where you misread your baby's signals or you take a bit longer to respond, your baby may cry. And something that you might have heard is that when your baby cries, their body is going to be flooded with stress hormones like cortisol, and this can lead to permanent brain damage. But guess what? Crying is very normal behavior for a baby. As a parent, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that. Crying is their way of telling you what they need or how they're feeling before they can speak. And they use it to communicate so many things like hunger, tiredness, discomfort, pain, or simply to let you know that they're bored and they need a new toy or a different activity. We've even studied the crying patterns of babies with some really interesting findings. Dr. Ronald Barr found that babies all around the world follow a similar crying pattern. He called it the infant crying curve, and here's how it looks. As newborns, babies generally cry for about 1 to 2 hours per day. Then, when they're around 2 to 3 weeks old, that crying starts to increase, reaching its peak when they're around 6 to 8 weeks old. During this time, some babies might cry for 2 to 3 hours per day and others up to 5 hours per day. After that peak, the crying gradually decreases, usually settling down by 3 to 4 months. Now, as you can see, that's a lot of crying, and when you're in the middle of it, every minute can feel like an eternity. But remember, billions of babies have gone through these intense crying periods and they don't suffer cortisol-related developmental delays or brain damage. This is because there is a huge difference between normal crying and harmful stress that comes from neglect. Brief periods of crying won't harm your baby's brain or erase all that loving care that you're providing the rest of the time. What's actually harmful for babies isn't these brief moments of crying, it's ongoing neglect. For example, if you ignored your baby all day, only attending to basic needs like feeding and changing diapers on a strict schedule, which was what was happening in a Romanian orphanage used in a study often cited online, this would be neglect and it would cause your baby to experience continuous stress. And this constant stress would keep their stress hormones like cortisol high, which could affect their development. But this is extreme, and I'm willing to bet that that's not what you're doing. If you're doing your best to respond to your baby's needs and helping them calm down when they need it, crying isn't going to lead to harmful cortisol levels or impact their development. This leads me to developmental milestones, another common cause of stress for new parents. You've probably heard things like babies should roll over by 4 months or they should be sitting up by 6 months. And when your baby isn't doing these things at exactly these ages, it can feel really scary. But milestones don't work the way a lot of people think they do. It's not about hitting a particular skill before they reach an exact age. We don't expect all babies to roll over before they turn 4 months old and assume there's a problem if they don't. Or get worried if a baby hits 6 months and can't sit up. Every baby is unique and learns at their own pace, and because of this variation, each developmental milestone actually has an age range, not a specific age for when we expect babies to achieve them. And often this range is wider than most parents think. Take rolling over, for example. It's often considered a 4-month milestone, but it is perfectly normal for babies to learn to roll over anywhere between 4 and 7 months. So focus on the ranges for developmental milestones, not an exact age. And if you want something you can quickly reference to for those ranges, I've got a free developmental milestone guide that you can download that I'll link to down in the description. And the next time you find yourself worrying because your baby isn't doing the same thing as another child their age, take a deep breath and remind yourself that as long as your baby is making progress and hitting those developmental milestones within those expected ranges, they're doing great. Now, one quick thing that is important to mention here is that there are certain milestones that we expect children to hit at the very latest, so that end range for each of these milestones, by 3, 6, 9, and 12 months of age. And if they aren't reaching these milestones within these expected timeframes, this raises what we refer to in a clinical setting as a developmental red flag. A developmental red flag suggests that your child may not be advancing at a pace consistent with their peers, which could hint at a developmental delay or possibly a more severe issue. Now, this isn't something to panic or stress about, but it does mean that it's worth getting looked at by a professional just to be sure, as early detection of potential developmental issues allows for prompt intervention, which improves your child's chances of catching up with their peers and reduces the effects of any developmental delays on their overall growth. So as a parent, it is really important that you know what they are and how to spot them. Now, this video is already getting long enough with my analytics telling me that most people leave if I go on for much longer than this. So I've made 2 extra videos to go into everything you need to know in detail depending on your child's age. You can see the 3-month red flags here and the 6-month red flags over here. So just pick the one that suits you best and head on over and watch that one next.